All right, so we're going to start off our metal rhythm with some muted eighth notes, and I'm going to pick downwards towards the floor. So listen to the example with a drum groove, and then we'll come back and we'll break it down. So here's the first example. So let's start by talking about the left hand. We're playing an E power chord. This could also be called an E5 chord. To say power chord sounds cooler though. So we'll play the open low E string along with the second fret of the A string. That's pretty much all we need for this chord. You can also get the second fret of the D string. So that way we'll be playing E, B, and then another E. Two notes though, two different notes. So I'm not going to be playing at all on the top three strings. Now with the right hand, we're simply going to strike downwards with the pick. So we're just going to pick down towards the floor, and I'm going to mute the chords as well. So I mute by covering up the strings with the side of my picking hand. So if I don't mute, the chord sounds like this. But we want to mute. It's going to sound heavier and more in the pocket with the drum groove. And there's varying degrees of how much you want to mute. You can mute a lot or a little bit. Nothing at all. So you've got all those variations in between. Now I'm counting eighth notes. Eighth notes are when we have two notes for every one beat. So if I count in with my foot playing quarter notes, every time my foot hits the floor, I'll give it a number. 1, 2, 3, 4. Eighth notes would mean that I would have two hits for every time my foot hits the floor. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And that's how I'm counting. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So for this first example, I'm playing one measure or 4 beats worth of eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then I'm sustaining that E. So one round would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I just repeated that 4 times. So I'd highly recommend practicing along with a metronome, or better yet, with a drum machine. I've got some drum loops set up here, so these are not real drums. We have a real drummer and a real bass player when we're playing our jam track, but for these examples, I'm simply playing along with a drum machine. That will really help keep you in time, and it's more fun. So that's our first example. Our second example, we'll add an F power chord. Let me go ahead and play through it, and then we'll come back and break it down. So here's our second example. Okay, so we added a new power chord. This will be an F power chord. The note F is found on the first fret of the low E string, so that'll be our root note. Then I'm also playing on the third fret of the A string. We could stop there and just play those 2 notes, or we can also add the 3rd fret of the D string. That's a repeat of the note F, so we'd end up with 2 notes, F, C, and F again. So I played 1 measure of E with the E power chord in 8th notes. Continuing with the 8th notes for the F power chord. Back to the E power chord. And then we'll hold the F power chord. Once again, picking downwards and muting the chords. So 1 round sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's example number 2. You may have noticed during that example, before it started over again, I did a scratch. That's when I simply take the side of the pick, and on the lower strings, it works best on the lower strings because they're wound, I simply strike the pick and slide downwards. Doesn't work quite as well on the top strings, although that could be a cool effect. But I did that on the bottom strings. Combination of sliding with the pick and then sliding with the left hand. Very cool, simple idea that always sounds great. A lot of energy in that. I always love to do that whenever possible. So all of these little things with the technique really add up. The muting, the down picking, the scratches, and the slides. For our 3rd example now, we're going to be using some 16th notes. So 16th notes will be 4 notes for every 1 beat, so there'll be a little more to do with the picking hand. Let me go ahead and play the example with the drum beat, and then we'll come back and break it down. So for 16th notes, we're now going to need to alternate pick. This is where we pick down followed by an up. So we'll start with the E power chord, and then we're going to pick 4 16th notes. That'll be 4 notes in a row on the open low E string, and the picking pattern will be down, up, down, up. And with 16th notes, we have 4 notes in the space of 1 beat. That's 4 notes for every time my foot hits the floor. So as I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 16th notes would be counted 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. Those are 16th notes. So you can see how it's important to get the alternate picking happening, because it'd be very difficult to play 16th notes downpicked all the time. So we're going to start off with the E power chord, 4 16th notes on the open low E string, followed by a D power chord. This will be played by striking the open A string and the open D string. Continue with the 16th notes on the open low E. So far we've done this. Now we're going to play an F power chord by playing on the 3rd fret of the A string, 3rd fret of the D string. And I'm just barring there with my first finger on those 2 strings. 16th notes on the low E, back to the E power chord. So far we've done this. Now we're going to repeat E followed by the 16th notes, D followed by the 16th notes, and then we'll end by playing an F power chord, 3rd fret of the A and the D string, and simply sustain that. Then the whole thing starts all over again. Even though I'm playing 16th notes, I'm still muting, and sometimes I still even have the scratch in there just because I think it sounds cool. So here's one round of this entire progression. And here it is once again, a little quicker. 1, 2, 3. That time I even scratched before I started playing. I think that also sounds cool too. It really sets up something cool is about to happen. 1, 2, 3. For our next example, we're going to play the same chord progression, but we're going to do it with some new power chords in a new position on the neck. So here's the next example played with the drum machine. Okay, so here we're playing the same chords, new position on the neck. For the E power chord, we'll play 7 on the A string, that will be the root note E, along with 9 on the D string. Now I formed this chord with my 1st finger and my 4th finger. That's a little bit unusual. Most people would probably play the 1st finger along with the 3rd finger. But whatever seems comfortable for you is quite all right. So if you see me using my 1st finger and my 4th finger, that's why. It just feels more natural for me. So I'm going to play that E chord, 16th notes, move down 2 frets, and we've got a D power chord. That's between 5A, 7D, 16th notes. Move this up 3 frets, now to an F power chord. That's 8 on the A string, 10 on the D string, followed by the 16th notes, and back to the E power chord and the 16th notes. So far we've done this. Now we'll play E once again, move down 2 frets to D, move up 3 frets and hold the F. So here's one round. Sometimes I even vibrato the chord a little bit. I shake the chord up and down. Not something you have to do, but it can sound kind of nice. Our next example will be exactly the same, but here we're going to play a power chord with a 5th in the bass. This will mean we're going to play an inversion of the power chords that we've been playing. This will sound a little heavier. I don't want to confuse you with any of the theory right now. Let me just go ahead and play it along with the backing track, and then we'll come back and I'll teach you the example. Okay, so let's take a look at the chords. This is identical to the previous example, but here we're going to start off with our E chord, which previously we played like this. We had 7A, 9 on the D. The notes were E and B. Here what we're going to do is we're going to take this B note and also play it on the 7th fret of the low E string. So now we have 7 on the low E, 7 on the A, 9 on the D string. So this will be an E chord, an E power chord with the 5th in the bass. We can say it's an E power chord, E5 over B. The name sounds a little more complicated than maybe it needs to be, but technically if you see it written down on a piece of paper, it would be E5/B. It means it's an E power chord, but B is the lowest note. So we're going to maintain that shape and play the exact same chord progression. And this can sound a little heavier. So instead of having the chord sound like this, it's going to sound like this. Here's the example played one time through. And that can be a really cool little trick. So maybe you play the chords without that 5th in the bass one time, and then you add the 5th in the bass the second time around. Okay, so far we've done 8th notes, 16th notes, power chords. We've talked about muting, down picking, and alternate picking. So that's a lot to take in. So why don't you go back, review everything. When you feel comfortable with what we've done so far, then you're ready to move on.